Does anyone in this audience believe that our government is working well for the American people today? What should of the people, by the people, and for the people mean as we head towards 2020? Government of the people means government for all the people, everybody, every American, every child, regardless of the color of your skin, your religion, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, or how much money you have. Every American should be represented. Government for the people means exactly that. It means a government that prioritizes the security, the prosperity, and the liberty of every American citizen. It means no interest comes before the people's interest. And ladies and gentlemen, that includes political parties. Government by the people means that citizens are in charge of politicians, not the other way around. The truth is, our representative democracy doesn't represent us anymore. Voters should choose their leaders. Today, it's our elected officials who are choosing their voters, and that is all at the center of this intractable problem in Washington. Now, the point I'm about to make may sound a bit technical, but it's an important one I need to make. In most states, congressional districts have been strategically drawn to benefit whichever party is in power. It is a tactic used by party leaders to create as many safe congressional seats for their sides as they can. It's a process known in Washington and in many places throughout the country as gerrymandering. It has forced congressional districts into the furthest reaches of partisanship, leaving Americans with only the most hyper-partisan candidates to choose from. And that means a Congress that fights from only the most extreme positions from the far left and the far right. The result? People lose faith in democracy when they feel their vote doesn't count and their voice is not heard. Now, what are the consequences of a hyper-partisan Washington? Let's start with immigration, which today is being used as a political weapon instead of being addressed as a national security priority. On the far left, there are calls to abolish ICE. On the far right, there are calls for mass deportation, a policy of separating parents from children. These are both false choices. We can have strong borders to protect us from terrorists and those who wish to do us harm. But we also can treat all people with a deep sense of humanity and dignity. We must enact the common sense immigration reform that a majority of Americans already say they want. Investments in border security, a path of legalization for unauthorized immigrants, citizenship for dreamers, and modernized immigration system that attracts and retains the best and the brightest people from all over the world who will contribute positively to our economy and our culture. What other consequences are there of this hyper-partisan Washington, D.C. that we are living through? Today, millions of Americans, people are living in fear of losing health care, of going bankrupt if they get sick. The far left has called for government-run health care, even eliminating the private health insurance market. The far right has called to repeal the Affordable Care Act for nearly a decade with no clear replacement, which would leave people vulnerable, especially those with pre-existing conditions, and costs would absolutely skyrocket. Once again, neither is a viable solution. What's the truth? The truth is that healthcare costs are the biggest driver of unaffordable care. Yet neither side, extreme left, extreme right, has offered and developed any kind of credible plan to reduce costs by increasing competition or requiring more transparency on prices from hospitals and drug companies or investing in preventive care. This is a problem that can be solved. We must bring down healthcare costs while increasing choice and access. The American people deserve so much more than the broken two-party system is providing. But just take a pause for a minute. Talk about immigration and healthcare. Just ask yourself, the majority of Americans, 75, 80%, want to see this being solved. Why isn't it being solved? Because it's not in the interest of the far left and the far right extremes. Today, not enough Americans are trained for the jobs of tomorrow. The far left is promising guaranteed government jobs. The far right has touted the stock market as a proxy for economic health, ignoring the millions of people without employment, employable skills, or access to good jobs. The truth, once again, is that America does not lack jobs. We lack the skills for the jobs of tomorrow and today. What's the solution? We must invest in lifelong learning as a country and increase access to vocational training and apprenticeships. When people have skills the market demands, they can find and get good-paying jobs and earn success. Today, believe it or not, a majority of teens worry that they could get shot while they're in school. Let me repeat that because it's hard to even imagine. A majority of American teenagers worry that they are going to get shot while at school. Now this is horrific, unconscionable, a shameful statistic that none of us should find acceptable or accept. It is the highest responsibility of our government to protect its citizens. But once again, the majority of the country, most Americans, want to see a solution to this. Some on the far left want to ban guns altogether. The far right has pushed back on even reasonable limitations on gun ownership. I strongly believe it's time to enact common sense gun reforms that are supported by a clear majority of the American people. We must protect people's constitutional right to bear arms and make it safer to do so through universal and enhanced background checks with no loopholes. And if you are a criminal or mentally ill, you should not be able to obtain a gun in the United States. But most importantly, no parent should be afraid to take their kid to school because of fear of gun violence. America's education system ranks below 23 other countries in math, reading, and science. We must improve the quality of American education at all stages of life. The far left has called for expensive college programs that the country simply cannot afford. The far right doesn't want to spend another dime on this issue. Once again, we need a simple, sensible, holistic approach to education reform, one that reflects the 21st century economy and the needs of today's students and workers. And again, this is not just a government issue. Schools can be bold and entrepreneurial. Look at Purdue. It's incredible what's happened here. And this can be scaled. Under President Daniels, the cost of an education here will be less expensive in nominal dollars in 2020 than it was in 2012. Congratulations. Got to clap for that. There are other schools. Schools can also innovate, like Arizona State, which is reinventing higher education, making it easier for students to stay in school and earn a degree. We must make our education system more nimble, more advanced, and driven by innovative new ideas. But true reform requires everyone at the table: students, parents, educators, administrators, unions, charters, parochial schools, and businesses. Let's turn to our tax code. Today, our tax code is unfair and too complicated. Yet we have been living with it for so many years because the broken two-party system does not want to fix it. It's not in their interest. The code is full of loopholes and carve-outs bought and paid for by special interest groups. Who do those special interest groups work for? Our representatives. We need to talk about reforming the tax code, not with bumper sticker slogans, but with tax cuts for the middle class and small businesses to spur hiring and economic growth. And I myself should be paying higher taxes, and all wealthy Americans should have to pay their fair share. I think we can all agree on that. Let's create the predictable, simple, and fair tax system America needs and deserves. And by the way, the people deserve to see the tax return of anybody who is running for president.
I agree.
And if I choose to run, I promise I will absolutely release my tax return. But our nation's $22 trillion debt is threatening our economic future. Politicians on the left are proposing massive new programs without any realistic plans for how to pay for them. Politicians on the right talk about fiscal responsibility, but what do? They give a corporate tax cut, they give tax breaks to the privileged, and at a time when we can't pay our bills. The truth is both sides have been reckless with our finances. We can no longer ignore our crisis level of federal debt anymore. The programs millions of Americans are depending on are going bankrupt. Now, it is time to balance the budget, to pay our bills. I believe we can do so while keeping America strong and reinforcing the safety net for the most vulnerable. What it will take is something sorely missed in Washington, D.C. these days. And that's where I started, and that's leadership. We need authentic, servant leadership in Washington, D.C. Now, after a generation of failures to put the American people first, the results have been cynicism, fear, anger, and a collapse of trust in institutions, as well as a weakening of faith in vital systems, including free market capitalism and democracy itself. The magnitude of the failures can be found in the divisiveness and the dysfunction of our two-party system. And in one of the most significant security threats America faces in the post-World War II era is the presidency of Donald John Trump. Trump's first 2 years in office have resulted in significant damage here at home and abroad. He has embroiled U.S. industry in a damaging and unnecessary trade war, resulting in a tax on consumer goods and services, and for farmers across the country have lost access to valuable markets that are not going to come back for many years. He has turned his back on long-standing strategic alliances. He has walked away from the fight against ISIS in Syria despite the advice and counsel he has gotten from his advisors. He has pulled out of treaties designed to keep the American people safe. He has turned a blind eye to Russian interference in our democratic process. He has unilaterally abdicated our historical role as a global leader. And ladies and gentlemen, he has poisoned our culture and our values, giving hate and hate speech and racism and bigotry license.
Yeah.
I could go on and on. Now, there are critics who condemn me for even thinking about running outside of the two-party system for fear it would lead to President Trump's re-election. Respectfully, here's my response to that. Trump must not serve a second term. And as I explore whether to run for office, I'll do so with the conviction that my final decision must not make his re-election a possibility. I can assure you, no one wants Donald Trump fired more than I. I also believe there are millions of Republicans who do not want to re-elect Donald Trump. And given the choice between him and a far-left Democrat, I believe Trump would win re-election. It is intellectually dishonest to suggest that either party's candidate could lose because of a third choice. I am considering a run because members of both parties are not yet doing the job they were elected to do. None of what we are witnessing today at the highest levels of federal government would have surprised our first president, George Washington. He actually saw it coming. When George Washington stepped away from the presidency and ceded power, he established two unique American traditions that have endured until today. The first is the peaceful transition of power, and the second is the recognition that our institutions are bigger than any one person. As he said goodbye, this selfless leader issued a warning as he looked into the future. Washington warned us to beware of the influence of factions, or as we know them today, political parties that would put selfish interests ahead of the national interest. He warned that factions can, in his own words, become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have been lifted to unjust dominion. George Washington was a great American. He was a great visionary. And he was right. And I want to be clear on one point. While I firmly believe our current president is unfit for office, and that our current two-party system is in dire need of repair, I don't believe for one moment that individual Americans who call themselves Republicans or Democrats are unpatriotic or ill-intentioned. To the contrary, the American people are better than so many of the people in our political class. And millions of honorable people are brimming with kindness and good ideas. And I've met many of them. I've seen the brilliance that results when smart, passionate people with different backgrounds and ideas come together in a room for common purpose. As I've traveled the country, I've witnessed courageous problem solving by ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things, such as the retraining of coal miners for new jobs, finding homes for refugees, creating new ways to fund small businesses, finding jobs for tens of thousands of veterans and opportunity youth, and delivering meals to those who can't afford food. The will to do something that others say is impossible, to take a risk for the greater good. This is the true spirit of the American people. And it's that spirit that gives me such optimism that we can correct our course and restore the promise of America. I'll conclude my remarks today by once again asking the questions. What kind of country do we want to live in? What kind of America do we want to pass down to our children and our grandchildren? I want us to live in a country where all people have access to opportunities. I want my children and grandchildren to live in a country where people have power because we have a government that is of the people, for the people, and by the people. And looking ahead, let's talk honestly about our problems. But let's also talk openly about new ideas, the best ideas, no matter where they come from. And let's debate them with civility, with respect, and optimism. Finally, let me just share a brief personal story with you. My wife and I and a group of friends had an opportunity to visit a place I've always wanted to go to but never had the chance. And that was, we went to Normandy. We spent an entire day there. We saw firsthand the bravery, the valor, the sacrifice of Americans and our allied forces literally saving the world. We walked through the American cemetery and saw 9,300 headstones that represented the sacrifice of young Americans. After spending an entire day there, which was so emotional and so uplifting at the same time to think about what we did back then, how we literally saved the world. At the end of a full day, we're actually leaving and we're in our car in the parking lot. A car pulls up right next to us. I hear American voices, so I get out of the car, I introduce myself, and it's a young nurse and a lawyer, a married couple from Baltimore, Maryland, probably in their mid-30s. And I just asked a simple question. What brought you to Normandy today? And she says, and she did not miss a beat, we came to Normandy to be reminded of who we once were. Can you imagine? She had to go to Normandy to be reminded of who we once were. It was like a spear that went through my heart. I don't need to go to Normandy to be reminded of who we once were. Being with you at Purdue today, I know who we are. And in this room, on this campus, I see a generation that is up to this challenge. I love America. I love our country. I know you love our country as well. And I know that we, the people, have the potential to restore, renew, and reimagine the United States of America. Thank you very much.